one of the four under the Sunni.
Oh, the Shafi'is that I was quoting?
The Ash-Shafi'i.
Shafi'i. Muhammad Ash-Shafi'i is
yeah,
the scholar.
and the
Shafi'i school is the...
That school and all that agreed with those is the ones you were quoting. Are there schools that disagree with those on this issue?
The four schools of Sunni jurisprudence, the Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanafi, and Hanbali, they agree on about 75 to 80% of everything. And they disagree on various matters that make up the rest. The material that I was quoting to you about jihad warfare is a matter on which they agree.
So all five schools agree on that warfare matter?
Yeah. Now there are some disagreements as to some aspects of it. There are some disagreements in terms of the stipulations for offensive jihad versus defensive jihad, but those disagreements are essentially academic exercises right now because there is no offensive jihad, as I explained. It's all defensive right now, at least in terms of its legal justification. There are also some differences in terms of how one treats prisoners, and some differences in other areas like apostasy law. Islam mandates death for somebody who leaves Islam, although the Hanafi school allows for a female apostate to be kept alive as long as she's imprisoned, essentially imprisoned for life or until she recants and becomes a Muslim again. So there are some disagreements on these things. Generally, the basic principles are held in common, and the disagreement comes on certain other aspects that flow from those basic principles.
Okay, and the secondary follow-up question is regarding, you had stated that mockery holds no place and that free speech, even though needs to allow mockery and allow all these things, even though that is not what we were espousing. When you called a respected professor of the law school a clown, and repeatedly, both on your blog and in the speech, and in your both times, how can you state that that was respectful and not mockery? And how do you expect us to respect your opinion when you don't respect the people who are hired to teach us, those who are trained to show us our way?
I don't respect that man. I listened to him yesterday. I listened to him carefully, and I asked him a question based on what he had said. And he joked, and he parried, and he acted cute. I don't respect him. I'm sorry if you respect him, and I appreciate that you respect him, but I don't feel myself bound to do so. Yes, sir.
You talked a lot about free speech, and I read your blog a lot, and you've, I forget the other guy who writes quite a few of your articles.
Hugh Fitzgerald?
Hugh Fitzgerald wrote an article called Zionism is Noble, for instance. However, in Israel itself, I don't know if there are a number of people who are trying to pursue free speech in Israel as to the course the government is taking there. One of them is the very respected scholar of fascism, and especially Vichy regime in France, Zav Sternhal.
Don't know.
And he spoke. He's actually a Zionist, a left-wing Zionist. He supported the foundation of Israel, but he's been an outspoken advocate for Palestinian rights since then. And he has come under numerous, repeated threats from the right-wing settler movement and from the right-wing movement in Israel, including the religious right, and there have been bombs placed under...
Insofar as anybody is threatened for anything he says, I oppose that. Anything else?
Well, my follow-up question was, how can you support Zionism when clearly the Zionist movement today is moving...
Making threats to people who speak is not intrinsic to Zionism.
May I speak?
Yeah, and I'm going to answer you. Making threats to people who speak is not intrinsic or essential to Zionism.
Okay, I'm understanding that, but I mean, you condemn the Islamic movement because you say that we live in the post-Caliphate period where so many Islamic scholars and Islamic figures are trying to bring out criticism and attacking free speech. Why don't you say the same thing about Zionism, which in Israel today is clearly creating an atmosphere where it's difficult to have free speech and difficult to criticize the things that the religious right and the settler movement is doing.
It's a very good adage to recall that Michael Medved said yesterday, the radio host. I was on his show and there was a caller and he said to the caller, "You're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts." There may be some people that you're talking about. I don't know this man that you have referred to. I never heard of him. And maybe he has been threatened. And if he's been threatened, I think that's heinous and I oppose it. However, To characterize Israel as being a state in which there's no freedom of speech or freedom of speech is restricted, I think is kind of fantastic and fictional. Israel is clearly the freest state in the Middle East, and the state that most clearly embodies the principles that I have been discussing and defending today. And compared to Israel, compared to Syria, Egypt, Jordan, et cetera, Saudi Arabia, you're going to find far more serious abuses. But I think the fundamental thing here is what I was trying to say to you before, and that is that there's nothing intrinsic to support for Israel or to Zionism that would deny anybody freedom of speech, whereas freedom of speech, the denial thereof, is a fundamental principle of Islamic law, as I explained to you in the talk. And so that's the difference there. There may be jerks everywhere. There may be people who do bad things everywhere. Nobody has a monopoly on evil. Nobody has a monopoly on trying to shut people up. Everybody can do that. But the question here is, where is it institutionalized and made into a principle of the state? And that's what I oppose. I mean, of course, I oppose all jerks too. But opposing the principle of the denial of the freedom of speech is what I'm talking about. Anybody else? Eric?
Yes. What in the life example of the Prophet Muhammad might serve as a precedent? Because we're told by scholars like Karen Armstrong that he was an itinerant preacher who preached peace and love, and that the only warfare he ever waged was defensive warfare, just like how Christians have just war doctrine. Mm-hmm. Is this true, or have we been bamboozled?
No, Muhammad fought 78 battles in his lifetime, and 77 were offensive. And Muhammad also had some poets who troubled him. Arabic is a wonderful language, and it's very poetic and lends itself to poetry very easily. And there were some poets who gave Muhammad fits. They made fun of him. They made fun of the Muslims. Some of it was in poor taste, so on. They were his contemporaries. I'm talking about at his time. And among these were a woman, Asma bin Marwan, and a man, Ka'b ibn Ashraf. And in any case, he asked his followers who would kill them for him, and he rewarded those who did murder these poets. And this, unfortunately, is exemplary behavior for Muslims. And see, here again, we come to the problem that if the denial of the free speech is encouraged and institutionalized, rather than just the individual action of somebody who ought not to be doing what he's doing, it becomes more problematic, because then we have to deal with the problem, the possibility of that becoming institutionalized here. I don't want to live in that kind of society. And so in any case, the problem is that Muhammad is called the excellent example of conduct. Chapter 33, verse 21 of the Quran says that Muhammad is your example for behavior, that you want to know what it's like, in other words, to live a human life. You want to live a really good human life. You want to live the best human life possible. Imitate Muhammad. This is the Quran, and it's standard Islamic law. And so when Muhammad orders these poets murdered for making fun of him, he's not setting a very good precedent in terms of free inquiry or free discussion. And he's actually giving justification to people who would behave in the same way in our own age, because of those who look to him as being, for all time, the excellent example of conduct. Yes, sir?
Regarding the other religions of the book, Judaism and Christianity, I myself am a Christian, and I've kind of deeply delved on my own time into the Old Testament.
Yeah.
How would this compare to Old Testament law and Judaic law, wherein there is much battle and there is much talk about the right to battle, even offensively, again, for purposes of furthering God's purpose?
Yeah, this is very important, comes up all the time, so I appreciate you asking the question. There are several fundamental differences between the passages of the Hebrew Scriptures to which you refer in the Quran. One of them is that it's certainly true. It's obvious. You can look in the book of Joshua and some places in Deuteronomy, and you will find God telling people to go and kill other people. And they do. And they have done the right thing, according to the Scriptures, by doing that. And you actually don't find that in the Quran. You find exhortations to do that. You find that there are orders to do that, but you don't actually see it being done. And so actually there have been, on that basis, people who even argue that the Bible is more violent than the Quran. And I suppose in terms of the rating that each would get if each were a movie, you could make that case. But there's a fundamental, there are several important differences in the violence in the one and the violence in the other.